Good evening and welcome to tonight's panel discussion on Seattle's World Cup, The View from Europe. I'm Ron Krabill and I'm the director of the Global Sport Lab, and we're really pleased to have you here. This is the 6th event in our spring series connecting the local experiences of Seattle to the global experience of the mega event that is the World Cup. We're glad you've joined us, whether this is your first session or you've come to all of the previous sessions as well. Before we get started, a quick programming note that we have postponed next week's session, which will be focused on the Pride Match and LGBTQIA+ rights in the World Cup. We've postponed it to June 8th. So the session is still happening, but it will move to June 8th. So that means no session next week, May 18th, or the following week, May 25th, which is Memorial Day. But we will then return with our focus on Egyptian soccer on June 1, and then the Pride Match with Jen Barnes, who's the co-chair of the Pride Plus Match Impact Council for the local organizing committee, as well as the founder and co-owner of Rough and Tumble Pub, as well as the co-owner of Salmon Bay FC. She'll be joining us on June 8th for our final session. So once again, I want to remind our online audience that we're operating tonight as a hybrid program with about 80 students in the room and several hundred participants registered online. Following an initial panel conversation, there will be opportunities for Q&A both in the room and online using the Slido platform. And for those of you online, we'll put up a screen with Slido instructions when the time comes. Finally, a big thanks yet again to our co-sponsors, the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at UW-Bothell, the Responsible Business Law Initiative of the Baer Institute at UW School of Law, and of course, the Jackson School of International Studies. Now, I am pleased to set the stage for our panel. We are incredibly lucky to have 3 top French scholars of global football and sporting mega events with us here tonight. First, we have Paul Dietschy, Professor of Contemporary History at Marie and Louis Pasteur University, and he's also the editor of the French journal Football's History, Culture, Economy, and Society, which I'm very honored to have just published in literally next week. It's not even officially out. So here we have Stéphane Mourlane, lecturer in contemporary history and deputy director of the Mediterranean Institute of Social and Human Sciences at Aix-Marseille University. And finally, we have Yvan Gastaut, lecturer in history at the University of Côte d'Azur in Nice. Taken together, all 3 of our guests bring an incredible wealth of knowledge and historical memory around the World Cup, the Olympics, and their impacts on local host cities. So let me offer a warm welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
So I thought what I would start today with is just a question of how is soccer in the United States viewed in Europe, and more specifically in France?
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Ron, for the kind invitation. As you can hear, I'm French, but I will try to evoke, first of all, the link between France and American soccer. In France, we consider that America is mainly identified by American sport, like baseball, basketball, and in first, what we call football américain, that is to say, football for you, but for us, football is soccer. So, since the 19th century, America fascinated French, and there were French travelers who came to America and they wrote some books about America. And for instance, one of the main famous writers at the end of the 19th century, he was famous as Émile Zola, maybe you heard of Émile Zola, it was Paul Bourget. Now he's quite unknown and forgotten. But Paul Bourget had written journals, and he dedicated some pages to football, American football. And for him, it was a kind of really part important of the American culture. And this important part was the violence of the game, And a game which was played by the elite of America. I think he was not really wrong. And you can see on the screen what he wrote. The signal is given at the beginning of the game, and the game begins. A terrible game. One that alone will suffice to measure the gulf separating the Anglo-Saxon world or masculinity from the Anglo-Saxon, from the Latin world. A game of young mastiffs bred to bite, to rush into the fray, a game of a race made for savage attacks, violent defense, relentless conquest, and struggle to the bitter end. And this kind of description was continued maybe until the 1980s. So when soccer appeared in the sport journal and among the specialists of soccer in France, it appeared concerning USA when US team participated to the first World Cup. And in particular, in Italy, in 1934, you have an extract, but it's in French, but I can't translate what the French journalist said about the American players. The American players have more youth and goodwill than a genuine science of football. So for the French, soccer was not really the real sport of Americans, and Americans had to learn and to improve. And even when the US team beat England in the World Cup in Brazil in 1950, you can see the first page of the daily L'Équipe, who say, what a surprise, England beaten by the United States. It was not normal in a way. So for a long time, soccer, American soccer, didn't exist, view from Europe. And it changed in the 70s, especially for person like me, who are now 60 and who began to play soccer in the 70s. The history of NASL and Cosmos New York was followed with great attention in France, especially because Pelé, you know Pelé, greatest player of the history of football, the Brazilian, played for Cosmos, and Cosmos went to play in Paris. In the center of the screen, you can see a game between Paris Saint-Germain, you know Paris Saint-Germain maybe, between Cosmos and the cover of 11. It's a monthly journal about soccer. And even, maybe you know Pony, I don't know if it still exists. It was an American brand of football shoes in particular. And Pony exported the shoes to France. I played with Pony, and it was linked to NASL and Pelé. One last thing, or two last thing about the relationship between French and American soccer. You know that the first time USA organized a World Cup, it was in 1994. And France was eliminated at the last game and the last minutes of the qualification by Bulgaria. So for us, it was a kind of trauma. And so I think we didn't follow very with a great attention this World Cup, because it was still a kind of nightmare. You can see an extract of a journal as a broken dream. And finally now, what is this, the relationship? You can see both of us. Before the game between France and USA during the Olympic tournament, there is still a kind of, I must confess, a bit of condescendence toward soccer. Even so, now the competition, in particular of the MLS, is very followed in France, because some French players like Lloris or Thierry Henry have played in this league.
Yes, and Paul told about condescendence, and one sign of the French people's condescending view of soccer in the US is the acknowledgement that it's primarily a country of women soccer. Why is that the case? Because women's soccer is not very popular in France, and very male-dominated mindset still prevail in these games. However, women's soccer in France has a long history since the early 20th century. The first national championship, as you can see on the screen, was established shortly after the World War I. But in 1933, the French Football Federation banned women's soccer, branding it unsuitable for women. It wasn't until the 70s that the French Football Federation officially recognized women's soccer. In reality, women's soccer has developed very gradually. At the beginning of the 20th century, there is Olympique Lyonnais, as you know well, in Seattle, becoming a European powerhouse. Lyon won multiple UEFA Women's Champions League title and domestic championship, helping to rise the profile of French women's soccer. The women's team, led by American businesswoman Michelle Kang, since 2024, adopt a new name, OL Lyon. OL referring to the parent club, and Lyon as a portmanteau, I can say that, of the city, and Lyon, a French word from Lyonnais. Also, stadium attendance, it was Olympique Lyonnais. Also, stadium attendance is on the rise. It remained low, averaging around 1,000 spectators per day for the last season. By comparison, as you can see, the average for the English Women's Super League is around 7,000 people. On the other hand, the 2019 Women's FIFA World Cup in France was a huge success. More than 1 million spectators in the 9 stadium and a very strong television ratings. The US won the tournament, as you know, after defeating France in the quarterfinal, further cementing its reputation of US as a powerhouse of women soccer. This idea was already in the works when Marinette Pichon, the first French player to gain widespread recognition, left France in 2002 to play a season in the US with the Philadelphia Charge. She then returned in 2024 in the New Jersey Wildcats. Last thing for me, I would like to say a word about Megan Rapinoe, you know well, who has garnered significant attention from the French media, not only because she is an outstanding soccer player, but also because of her civic activism against discrimination. She appeared, as you know, on the cover of 2 French leading sport magazines in 2019, the year she been awarded the Ballon d'Or, just to remind you, it's a prize to honor the player judge to have performed best over the previous seasons. Men's US soccer, however, remains unattractive, except, Yvan, for a few French players who want to live out their American dream at the end of their career.
Yes, we can say that the World Cup 1994 was a great moment for the United States, not a great moment for France. Broken dream, you say, but America is still dream for footballer players retired in the beginning of the 21st century. Stéphane says that Marinette Pichon arrived in US in 2002. Men arrived after, because the first, there is an actuality, excuse me, in a few weeks, we will have Antoine Griezmann, maybe someone know him. He's playing actually in Atlético de Madrid from many, many years, and he's very important even in France and in Spain and in USA, arriving in Orlando City in July. This is the actuality. But, Stéphane, you can move. We had the first player arriving in US League MLS was one of champion of the world in '98 is Yuri Djorkaeff. I don't know if someone here know Yuri Djorkaeff, arriving in New York MetroStar before New York Red Bull in 2005. It was a real retreat, I think, because he played only 1 year. He scored 10 times, 10 goals, but he stopped his career at this time. And as says Stéphane, I think arriving in United States is not only to play football, but also to arrive in a country of dream for a French player, the dream of the American way of life. I think this is very important. But the best star, I can say, Stéphane mentioned it, and Paul also, is Thierry Henry, who present another profile, I think. Profile, it's not only a retreat, but a player who stay many years, and after also a trainer, in particular Montreal, but he plays many seasons, 2010, 2014, long time, 52 goals arriving at this time. And Henry, a very important star in France, very important star in England with Arsenal team, and also a star in New York. And I think that Henry is not only a star in Red Bulls, but a star in New York. And this has changed the profile of a football player. Other arriving after Henry, for example, more recently, Blaise Matuidi in Inter Miami, who is a very attractive club. But we have also, I think, another profile. And this other profile is quite interesting because we have some players who is not known in France because they are a special career in United States. And for example, I think many here know him because he played in Seattle as Ron. No, very him is Sébastien Letou, not known in France, but very known, I think, in United States because he made a very important career. Seattle Sounders in 2007 and 09, but also Philadelphia, Vancouver, Red Bulls, Philadelphia, Colorado Rapids, and DC United. A long career in United States as in attack, and also other profile like Aurélien Collin in Kansas City in particular. This is important because I think it's another style of profile. So, just a few words to finish my intervention about that. It's I think United States is a new destination for football player at a moment when the football is not only in Europe, but careers are going to move in other countries, other areas like Persian Gulf, maybe Asia, Australia, and very important, United States.
Yeah, you mentioned Sébastien Letou, who was the very first person signed to the Sounders. Also, Megan Rapinoe played for the Seattle Reign. So you're starting to make those Seattle connections. And I wonder if there's an impression in France or in Europe more generally of Seattle or Seattle soccer, or if it just doesn't register at all. Like is Seattle visible as a city as opposed to just part of the United States?
I will answer. Seen from France, Seattle is more the city of Boeing, Microsoft, very far city. You need 11 hours to fly to Seattle. But there's also a great part of French people who like football, who knows the football world. So Seattle means, first of all, for me, Megan Rapinoe, and also this French who came to play in Seattle. But we know also, and thanks to your contribution to the special issue of football on American soccer, that it's also a special culture of soccer. Is to say, a soccer which has also a civic project, political project, which is different, which is very original in the world of soccer.
Maybe we can add that the French people knows only the city and the club. The city is a club where a French player, as Yvan say, and especially New York, because French people are very fascinating by New York City. And I think the most popular US club is a Red Bull. Even because Red Bull is very, very popular around the world, even here.
Even in the room.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I also think Thierry Henry, having played for the Red Bulls, but also being such as a commentator now, is very, very present on US television as a commentator, particularly of the Champions League.
We can say that Thierry Henry is the most American football player in France.
In France. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Excellent. So next question, what has been the historical relationship between France and the French people and the FIFA World Cup specifically?
You know, for a long time, French sport men was more famous as officials than as victorious and champions. Maybe in America, one of the first French champions who was known, it was Georges Carpentier. Maybe it sounds a bell in your mind. But until, we can say, until the end of the Second World War, France was most famous by the officials, sport officials, who played a very important role in the organization of international sport. Since IOC, that is to say International Olympic Committee, was created in Paris in 1894, and its first president was Pierre de Coubertin, and FIFA, that is to say Football, Fédération Internationale de Football Association, was also created in Paris in 1904, and the first president was also French. It was not a hazard, because French people had a universalist project. The idea that sports could gather all the people of the world. Even so, this project, this universalist project, has not really effect in French colonies. But there was this project in sport. And in soccer in particular, French people play a very important role in the creation of World Cup. Why? In 1924, there was the Olympic Games for the second time in Paris. And maybe it was one of the first modern Olympic Games, in the sense of it was a mass spectacle. There were athletes from all the world, and in particular, Uruguayan team who won the Olympic tournament of soccer. But this player was not amateur. So after the game, there was a conflict between FIFA and IOC. And IOC wanted to impose a very strict definition of amateurism. So FIFA considered that it was a moment of creating their own competition. And you see on this photo on the left, French official Henri Delaunay, who was very, very important in the definition of the new competition, because there was at least 3 different projects. One European wanted only a European competition. It was promoted by the man on the right, the Austrian Hugo Meisel. But Henri Delaunay proposed a universalist project, that is to say a World Cup, and open to amateur and professional players. And that's the project who won. And it remained to be taken in effect. Okay. The second man was important. He was the French president of FIFA, Jules Rimet, who had a kind of political role inside the French Federation and other federations in Europe, so that at least 4 European teams came to Uruguay and Montevideo to play the first World Cup. So we can say that the French played a very essential role in the creation of the competition.
But after that, France's story of at the World Cup was for a long time a story of disappointment, of earthbreak, at least until the end of the 20th century. France was one of 4 European teams to cross the Atlantic and compete in the very first World Cup in Uruguay in 1930. But the team was knocked out in the first round. And as you know, after the French team had not a huge result at the World Cup. It was not until the 1958 World Cup in Sweden that France reached the semi-final, as you can see. Also, they lost that match. They won the third game place, and for a long time, that remained France's only major achievement in international soccer. And another great source of national pride that year was Just Fontaine, who scored the most goals ever in a single World Cup, 13 goals in 6 games, 6 matches. After that, 60s and 70s were a difficult period. France did not even qualify for the 62, 70 and 74 World Cup, and it was eliminated in the first round in 60 and 78. The biggest disappointment, however, came in 1982 World Cup in Spain, which became a true trauma in the collective memory in France. It was France semi-final, lost to West Germany, remembered as the night of Seville, after the city where the match took place. The game ended 3-3 after extra time, with West Germany winning 5-4 on penalties, still regarded as one of soccer's greatest match in history. But, especially in France, the match was marked by a spectacular controversy. A spectacular controversy that erupted at the start of the second half, as you can see, jumped into the French player Patrick Battiston, the goalkeeper, with knocked Battiston unconscious, very injured, and with no fault, with no the referee stay in silence. And in the collective imagination, this game symbolized France's famed flair, that artistic, free-flowing style clashing with German discipline, but it also reopened old World War II wounds. A top French magazine dubbed it the Third World War. They even linked Schumacher, the German goalkeeper, to an SS officer. Tension ran so high that France's president and Germany's chancellor issued a joint statement. It urged calm and recalled how post-war friendship has anchored Europe in peace. So there was another major disappointment with the loss in 1986 in semi-final against Brazil. Through it lacked the same dramatic intensity. This setback explained the 98 celebration that Yvan going to tell you about.
Yes, we arrive at the most important point of this afternoon. You have to forget all before. It's a rival of the double event. First event, as United States this year, in part, is the organization. First organization, no, not first. Second organization of World Cup in 1998. Second event is a victory at the end. And this is, as says Stéphane, a very important moment. We can say, as a historian, we have 4 historians here, an historic event for France. What is an historic event? And we can say today, I don't know if my friend are agree, that this soccer tournament was a historical moment. But why? Because France was mobilized, active, one word, emotion. Emotion, collective emotion. The night of the 12th of July 1998, and you can say here, champion du monde on the triumph arch, and victory against Brazil, the best team at this time, 3-0, with 2 goals about the star on this team, Zinedine Zidane. I don't know if you know Zinedine Zidane. He don't play in United States, but it's still important. People in France, the people, one of the best people adored in France, and Zidane was present at the Olympics in 2024 last year. And you can see here images of this match and images of the French newspaper, L'Équipe, who celebrate this victory. And the victory is also the 3rd of July, because we have a great manifestation, more than 1 million people in the streets to celebrate the victory. And the 14th of July, with the president, French President Jacques Chirac, who celebrate with the players this victory. It was not only sport and the soccer victory, but also a French victory. And at this time, we can say that the people were happy. Is it possible to make an history of the happiness? Maybe with the football, it's possible. And we hope that if United States organize and also have a victory on this tournament, maybe we will have the same thing, maybe. And also, I just say that quickly, we have also another message about this victory, a message about the question of identity and migrations. We said, Zizou Président. Zizou is a special name of Zinedine Zidane, the hero of France, who was the best player, but also a player who came from his family from Algeria. And we have a message at this time about the best way of integration with the football. And at this time, we have a slogan, a word, black, blanc, beurre. Beurre, c'est Arabic people. Blanc, white people. And black is the moment where the notion of integration was very high in France at this time. So also for stop. So also at this time, historian of sport became more intensive research about this subject.
I love that those examples include both the way sport can increase tensions between countries, also bring people together within a country. Like there are different dynamics going on there in terms of what sport and soccer, and particularly the World Cup, can do. I wonder if we can talk, since we're talking about the view from Europe, about another team, Italy, which has been a long-time powerhouse in world football, has won the World Cup many times. Had they won their playoff, they would be playing here in Seattle. Instead, Bosnia and Herzegovina beat them in the last playoff, and Bosnia will be coming instead. So I'd love to hear sort of how that absence of Italy in the World Cup, not just this time, but in the previous 2 World Cups as well, is perceived in Italy, and how have past World Cups helped the country sort of foster a sense of unity or international prestige?
Just a few words, because my best friends are specialists of Italy, and you have here the Corriere dello Sport was illustrated the defeat this year against Bosnia, arriving, I think, here in United States for the World Cup. Italia was beat by Bosnia at penalty, and here you can see the difficulty with Italy, a great nation of soccer, to exist until 2010.
Tuta a casa means everybody at home. Go back home.
Go back home, yeah, go back home.
Well, I will continue about the history of soccer and calcio in Italy. Very often, yes, there is a link which is made between fascism and football, that is to say, soccer, and that is link which interests historian of my generation when we began to study sport, the relationship between sport and politics, at least 30 years ago, so a long time ago. On this picture painted by Piemontese painter, what we see the ideal of fascist sport, that is to say, athleticism and rugby. No football, no soccer, and especially a sport which is practiced, not a public sport, not a sports spectacle. So it means that the relationship between soccer and regime fascist was a bit ambiguous, because for the at the beginning, for the regime, soccer was a foreign sport. Soccer was a sport which was very linked to violence of spectators, which was marked by bribery affairs. So it was not the ideal of fascist sport, which has as principal aim to prepare the future soldier of Mussolini. But you can change. The regime has also a very great program of building of big stadium as well as smaller one. And this big stadium, you can see on the left, Stadio Berta. Berta was a kind of martyr of fascism. And on the right, Stadio Mussolini in Turin. These two stadiums still exist. Stadio Mussolini is now the Olimpico Stadium, Stadio, the stadium which was used for the Olympic Games of 2006. So the regime has at this stadium, and they had to be used. Athleticism competition were not very interesting. So the main game, which can gather a lot of people inside this stadium, was calcio. So the regime converted himself to football, and they accept the organization of the World Cup of 1934. There are a lot of myths about this World Cup. The myth of a World Cup which was organized by Mussolini himself. In fact, until the eve of the competition, he was not very interested in it. And he attended to the first match, especially against the United States, and he realized that there was a lot of foreign journalists, and so that he could good propaganda for the regime. And thanks to the referees, in particular Swiss referee and Swedish referee, two neutral referee, the national Italian team could reach the final and win the competition. And it was at the end of the competition that the real meaning on the ideological point was reached, with a World Cup which was attributed by FIFA to the winning team. There was also, you see on the right, La Coppa del Duce, that is to say, a trophy named in the honor of Mussolini. And during the competition, there were also special supporters. On the right, you could see the German supporters of Krabill, that is to say, the organization of leisure of the Third Reich. 4 years after, the Italian national team won the World Cup again in France, in a period in which there were tension between the two countries. And this victory was considered as a victory of young people against decadent and old, that is to say the French, who were eliminated in the quarter-final. At the end of the competition, in final, the Italian beat Hungarian. And you can see on the left, Giuseppe Meazza, who made the salute fascist before receiving the World Cup from the hands of the French president, and the conclusion of the French press, Italy reign on the world. Last moment, it was a victory of 82.
Yes, I would like to focus on this one. The national soccer teams won the 1982 FIFA World Cup, also very special significance in Italy. And I'd like to focus on that. The context is very important to understand why this victory is seen as a redemption in Italy. First of all, this was the first victory for democratic Italy, following those that Paul told about the fascism regime in the 30s. In the image that you can see on slide of the President of the Republic in the stands, as happy as an ordinary fan, was seen as a symbolic, since Sandro Pertini, the Italian president, was a leading figure in the resistance against fascism. On the other hand, in 1982, Italy was emerging from the years of Lead. More than a decade of political violence. That decade of violence divided Italy, and so democracy itself come under a threat. Another key point to note from a sports perspective is the resurgence of striker Paolo Rossi, who had been implicated in a match-fixing scandal known as the Totonero scandal. At the end of the final against West Germany, the celebration was extraordinary. As soon as the final whistle blew in 1982, millions of Italians poured into the street. Not only in Italy, but all over the world, wherever the millions of Italian immigrants and their descendants live. This was a spontaneous street party that in popular memory, and sometimes in reality, went on 4 days. In Italy, journalists noticed that proliferation of Italian flags, something which had been and had polarized Italians on political struggles in 16th and 17th. Some have referred to a new Risorgimento. A new Risorgimento in connection, Risorgimento means the unification of Italy in the 19th century. We have not enough time, and we are not enjoying to talk about the next victory in 2006, because for French people it's another trauma. Maybe you have heard about Zidane. Zidane was with his infamous
Bad boy.
cut,
Zidane bad boy.
from and Zidane was sent off. Just a word, because this victory has a special significance in Italy, because the victory was against France. And there are a kind of condescendence from France to Italy, because in France you are used to say about Italy, sister, Latin sister, but little Latin sister, you know. And once again, FIFA World Cup is shaping the collective narratives, and that also shape international relations.
Fantastic. Just quickly, for those of you who haven't seen it, Claudia Rankine, who's a really famous American poet, has put together a really incredible video where she basically takes just about 6 seconds of the headbutt itself, slows it down into very slow motion, and then overlays it with all sorts of theory around post-colonialism and critical race theory. It's a fantastic piece, so I really encourage you to look that up.
There's also a statue. I don't remember the art.
It's art. Abdel Abdesmed was an Algerian artist who make a statue 5 meters. I don't know
Nobody wants of the statue in France.
The statue in sport are positive statues. This is a bad behavior, I think.
Interesting. So I'm going to open it up for questions in just a moment. So please, those of you in the room, we'll start with those in the room, then we'll alternate with people online. Just quickly, I'd want to ask our guests one more question. There have been lots of matches that have really made an impact over the course of the World Cup. You three, as historians of the World Cup, are really well versed in those questions. I wonder if you can each just give a brief example of a match that has had a significant impact, either in sporting terms or in political terms.
Just very quickly, I would like to focus on this match of the 1974 World Cup, on the match West Germany against East Germany, the game between the rival brothers, as the saying goes at this time. I remember it was the time of the Cold War, and sport was a battleground of the Cold War, and this game is also notable for being the only time East and West Germany played each other in top level, and in fact it was the first time East Germany had qualified for the FIFA World Cup final, and this first round match was drawing a lot attention. The buzz made it feel like a Cold War showdown. In fact, this game took place during a period of the Cold War known as détente, a brief thaw in tension, and the game also took place during the Ostpolitik policy, launched by West German Chancellor Willy Brandt in 1969. An Ostpolitik aimed to normalize ties with Eastern Europe, especially East Germany. And it's interesting to note that during the game, the West German crowd stayed calm, no hostility. We have to say that West Germany won the tournament after, and because they were defeated 1-2-0 for the East Germany. But even improving relation by 1974, sport channeled deep ideological divide. And the player of both teams swept shirts after the game, but threw not on the pitch, this was officially forbidden. After the fall, the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and East Germany dissolved. Unified Germany debuted at the World Cup in US in 1994 with only 2 East German players on the squad. It was my game. Yours, Paul?
Mine is the final of the 1966 World Cup, which was played in Wembley Stadium in London. For me, there are at least 3 meanings of this match. The first was the fact that the English who refused for a long time to be part of FIFA, in particular in the interwar period, decided after the Second World War to participate to FIFA. So they accept that finally the other could rule with them the game, the much popular game in the world. That's the first thing. But in the same time, they consider that their property came back to them, but they had to obviously to win. The final was disputed by West Germany, still West Germany, and England. And England won 4-2 goals. But after a controversial goal that you can see on the left, Geoff Hurst, the attackant, the forward of West Ham and the national English team, had a strike which was we bounced on the bar, and people didn't know if the ball has entered in the goal. So it was the Soviet lineman who decided that the goal was okay, and some considered that it was a kind of a game of USSR, who considered that it was useful that the West German lose this game. Yeah. In fact, the British, the English was better. But which was very important is that this game was followed by 600 million spectators, thanks to the satellite early bird. So it's the beginning of soccer and World Cup as a global game, as a global spectacle. And it's from this moment that television gives this special attraction to football, and also as an influence in the politicization of the game, because from this moment, you can see Elizabeth II giving the World Cup trophy to Bobby Moore, the captain. The political officials came numerous to the World Cup, and to try to benefit of the popularity of the game.
The ball was in, the ball was out. Where was the electronic, technical? We don't know. I want to finish this round with decentralization. We speak about Italy, Germany, and England, and France, of course. And I would just like evoke the Balkany and a state who was named Yugoslavia. A football soccer match is an history, I think. A soccer match is a vision of history, a vision of diplomacy at the moment. This is our function in historian to analyze some matches as a moment of politics and diplomacy. And this is a case for my colleague, but also for me. This is a match was organized during the Italian World Cup in 1990 in Firenze, Florence. The 30th of June at this time, and Yugoslavia, Argentina 0-0, and victory of Argentina at the tiro but with Maradona at this time. And why I choose this moment? Because this match is the last match of the nation of Yugoslavia. Why? Because the year after, Yugoslavia was broken in many nations, like Croatia, Serbia, or today here, Montenegro, Bosnia, who beat Italy this time. And we can the last dance for this nation. It was, why I speak about that, because it was the brilliant nation, brilliant generation of players. You are in this team, Croatian people, Croatian player, Šuker, Boban, Prozinecki. You have Serbian player, Stojkovic, for example, Bosnian player, and also Montenegrin player as Savicevic. And at the right, the narration of this match by an Italian journalist. His name is Gigi Riva. He said the last penalty, because he talked about the Farouk Abzibejic was a Bosnian player who lost the penalty, and it was the end of the nation. A penalty like an end of the nation. This is, I think, a good possibility to analyze the end of a country.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So I'd like to open it up to the floor. If anyone has a question, I'll actually repeat it for our online audience, but please let me know if you have a question. Who has something? Yeah. Go ahead, Lucas.
You guys, obviously, France in the past years have been dominating soccer all over, right? Football. Something that you guys mentioned about nationalities, mixing in nationalities, and of course, the immigration that exists all over the world, especially in Europe. One thing that's prominent online, especially maybe you know, online, a lot of people critique the team, the French national team, because quote unquote they're not French, right? That's one of the biggest things that people say. And when they win, they're French, and when they lose, they're not French. So what do you guys think about that idea of this immigration of course, players from Africa, African descendants playing for the national team? And how is it seen in France? How is it seen in Europe?
Let me just repeat the question. So the question is, the French team has had a great deal of success in the last 25 years. And a big part of the conversation about that success has been the migration of players from former French colonies. And online, there's a lot of debate and conversation about sort of saying, oh, they're not really French. And this line that's been repeated with a couple different players, when I win, I'm French, but when I lose, I'm Algerian, or I'm not French. So the question was sort of, how do you think about that from a French perspective?
Yes, that's a good question. What we can say first is that the tradition of having people from the colony is very long tradition, because the first black footballer in the French national teams it was in 1931. It was a guy who was named Raoul Diagne, and this year, in 1931, his father was named as a French minister for colony. So it's a very long tradition, and we have a lot of footballers from Africa. Long before, for instance, Great Britain, the English national team, the first black footballer is only in 1979. So there was a kind of acceptation of that. Second thing, these players of French national team, they are all, except for maybe Olysée today, they are all born in France. They have French nationality, so they are fully French, we can say. Yes, the fact that when they lose, they are not French, it's a bit difficult to say that, because maybe it's linked to a kind of condescendence toward footballers in France, more than the color of the skin of these footballers. Even so, that's right, there is a kind of contradiction between a France which is who have a party which is, we can say, racist, Rassemblement National, who have 30% of voters now. But I think in French football, racism is less spread than, for instance, in Italy or Spain.
I can't say something about that. It's a good question, I think, also. Yes, 98 was a victory against racism, I think, because this victory was analyzed as a victory against Front National, extremely right in France. So it's a political victory also. And you're right to say about the hesitation when you won, when it's a positive match, you have a discourse, mediatic discourse, positive, and when the French is not winning, as the example is in 2010 in South Africa, it was a big defeat with many discussion about the behavior of the football player who was very criticized. We say a term in France, racaille. Yes, the football is a very important point of the observation of the society about this subject, I think. Because many football players are becoming from migration, they are a story of migration.
I just can add that the far right obviously does not like the large number of players of color, Arabs, as they are often called, or black players from Africa or the Caribbean. But for many people in France, these players symbolize the integration. As you say, integration of immigrants into French society. They also represented a multicultural France. But we have also to say that a debate about children of immigrants who are born, say Paul, in France, and they are therefore French citizens by birth, yet choose to play for their families nation team. Of the 658 players taking part in the last Africa Cup of Nations across 24 teams, 107 were born in France. 107, that is 1 in 6. And it's very interesting to highlight that the Africa Cup of Nations is actually very popular on French television. And when the winning teams celebrate, their fans openly express their joy in the street, wearing jerseys and waving flags from their home country. Oh, for many French people, these young people, most of whom are French, are seen as symbol of failed integration. Some even regard them as a threat to national unity or identity.
Okay, I realize we're nearly at time, but I'm going to take 2 questions from online, and then these will be the last questions. And actually, before I do that, there's a third question, which is just, what was the clip from the poet that I had mentioned? So I'll just state it again. It's the poet's name is Claudia Rankine. She won, I think it was the National Book Award with her book Citizen, which has a printed version of it. But if you look up the Situation videos, it's a series of videos. So if you look up Claudia Rankine and Citizen, you'll find it. So I'll ask both of these questions and you can choose which one you want to answer. The first is, how does Europe and or France view FIFA as an organization? Is their reputation sort of better in Europe or France, or worse than it's perceived maybe in the US or elsewhere? And the second is, if Trump is visible during this World Cup, presenting the trophy, etc., how will this be understood across Europe, especially where football and fascism have been linked in the past?
No, Paul. I just want to say that Paul is a great specialist about the FIFA history. He worked a long time in a FIFA archive, so yeah. It's a the best person to.
I have to confess that I spent some time in Zurich, so I know the organization. Well, in France, FIFA is not very popular, obviously. Even so, it was a French creation in a way, because maybe there is one reason. French people thought that Michel Platini could be the president of FIFA 10 years ago. So there was a disappointment.
You have to precise who is Michel Platini.
Yes, Michel Platini was one of the main French players, great players, and he runs the European Confederation, UEFA, before to be a candidate, and so it was a bit complicated. So first of all, there was this disappointment, and I think in the media and among the specialists the people who like football. Consider that FIFA is now an organization who think mainly to win, to earn money, to make money with the tournament. Even so, I think it's not maybe something that could be thought in the other parts in the world. In Asia, I think FIFA has maybe a better reputation. So, no, in the media, FIFA is considered as an organization who fail in its main missions, which is not really true, because FIFA organize World Cup, but it has also as a task to regulate the circulation of players. They have also a program of development. It's not Infantino is not, that is to say, the president of FIFA is not only it's not the same. So it's the only face of FIFA. There are other faces which are more positive, I think.
Could we talk freely of our president?
You can speak freely. Yes, please.
Just a word. As you can imagine, as you know, Donald Trump is not popular in France, even for the far right. No, probably Donald Trump is the worst personality born in US. From point of view of France. In France, we were in love of Obama. And many people regret Barack Obama, even if in France we have never have a black president or black prime minister. It's kind of paradox. And French people don't really like Trump, and it's not a good point for the World Cup. The means, the way of Donald Trump to try to, how can I say, to appropriate the competition.
And just about that, the example of Trump, but we have an history of the links between presidents in every country and football. For example, Macron in France was very present in the victory of 2018 in Moscow, particular, and created also a link important. We saw Jacques Chirac, for example. But in every country, we have the importance of football in politics, with known from the beginning of this play, of this game, soccer. And this is important to study, because football, soccer is so popular that you have a very importance in politics, internal politics and diplomacy also.
One point we have to underline is that it's not a specific way of dictator, and especially a fascist regime, to instrumentalize sport and international mega events, as Yvan say, on the democratic regime, as in France. The leader of the country are very involved in these kind of events.
In 2018, the message was the victory of the Republic. And in 98, the message is victory of integration, like your question. It's not the same.
Fantastic. So with that, thank you so much for all your insights, all your historical background. Please join me again in thanking our guests for tonight. So let me just close with a quick reminder that our next session, as I mentioned at the beginning, has been postponed to June 8, which means no session for the next 2 weeks. But then we will return on June 1 with a focus on Egypt, and then finish up on June 8 with Jen Barnes with a focus on LGBTQIA+ rights. Thanks, and have a fantastic rest of your evening.